Julian, do you have a story of a chance encounter in your life, personally or professionally, that either really impacted you or them or both? It doesn't have to be someone you stayed in touch with, although it could be. It's really whatever comes to mind.
Well, I do, actually. It's one that I've often thought about because it was so pivotal in my life. I was at university. I had the fortune to go to Cambridge University, and in my first year, I think it was actually in my first term, um, I found a note in my pigeonhole, which says, "I hear you're a drummer. If you'd like to join a band, call me." And it was from a guy called John Romney, who later became a film critic over here in the national papers. And I called him. I wasn't a great drummer at the time, but I was keen. And we put a band together, which became a band called Fish Turned Human, and released a single. And in recording that single at the legendary Spacewood Studios in Cambridge, um, I met the guitarist who came up from London to record that session, became friends with him, moved when I left Cambridge, moved down to London, and eventually moved to Ealing, the part of London he lived in, um, and kind of became part of a musician. It's not a collective, but a group of friends who were in several different bands, uh, several of which I played with or had great contact with. It was my life for a number of years, and it set me off on a course of being a musician, running a recording studio with Sid Wells, who still works for me today at the sound agency. He's our technical director, like 40 years later. And I think if I hadn't had that note in my pigeonhole, things would have been very different because that whole that whole part of my life sensitized me to sound. And, people often say, why do you do what you do? How did it happen that you do what you do? Well, I had a whole career in marketing, producing magazines for companies, but all the way through, I was playing music. And so when I sold that publishing company, the heartland, the place I wanted to come back to, was sound and music. So I formed the sound agency in 2003. And so I think everything that's happened to me, and the reason we're having this conversation now, and all the people I know pretty much, came from that one note in my pigeonhole. If that had never existed, goodness knows what I'd be doing now. I might be an economist, or that's what I studied at university, or a tax inspector, or something like that. Who knows? So, yeah, that was one of those nodes where the paths lead off in different directions, and
Mm.
that was the path I went on.
Wow, that's great, and I love hearing these stories. For one, because I love reminding my audience. It's kind of the whole reason I started this podcast a couple of seasons ago, was to just continually remind my audience that the most successful people all have these stories of chance encounters. And sometimes the difference between success and not success is simply that the successful people saw them for what they were in that moment, and followed through. And that we have so many every day. Like, you have 3, 4, 10 chance encounters a day that don't have to become the life-changing story that you just told, right? That survivorship bias, where of course that's the story you're telling because it's the one that followed through. But the person you randomly meet in a coffee shop, the person you have a 10-second conversation with, a 5-minute conversation that you don't even get their name, you never end up talking to again, that can still have a ripple effect, and does in fact have ripple effects.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely. And if the physicists are right, there are an infinite number of universes out there where different choices were made. And
mm.
so there's one out there where I am a tax inspector beavering away at this very moment. So it's something to
So
reflect on,
interesting.
isn't it? There are many
Yeah.
of these in life, and the choices we make. And I think you're right about entrepreneurs. I mean, I guess I've been one since 1988 was when I started my first business. I don't think there's a huge difference, except that entrepreneurs kind of have a bit more faith, by which I mean
Mm,
a commitment to the idea that all will be well. I don't mean
mm,
some sort of glowing evangelistic vision of the future, or some do, but I certainly didn't. I tend to take life one day at a time, and I go along, and I believe in synchronicity and things happening for a reason. I tend to go with the flow a great deal, but going with it, that's where the faith is. Not dithering and not going, well, should I? No, it's just, it'll be okay. And things turn out the way they turn out. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs, that's, you know, crossing the bridge without the fear to the other side is a big part of being an entrepreneur. And a lot of people will not do that. They'll go, looks ropey to me. I'm not going there. I'll stay here. It's safe here. Thank you very much.